Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. It is Monday night in the States. We are in more than the middle of Rome. We're getting to those latter stages in Rome right now. Steve, so many topics to discuss. I'm just going to throw them your way and kind of pick your brain with it. You good with that?
Yeah, looking for it's been a really it's been it, a it's been packed with interesting matches and twists and turns. Not what we expected to come out of Rome between Rafa losing and winning only 4 games, Novak losing and winning only 5 games. What were the odds on that happening back to back days? But it did. But a lot of other interesting developments, and I'm going to let you lead us into it.
Yeah, and we're going to get to a lot of the developments that happened on the court, but first, a couple things off the court. One, Jessie Pegula, she announced before Rome that she's not going to be playing Rome and possibly Roland Garros. We're so used to seeing her consistent. Hope she gets healthy. Hope she can play Roland Garros and get back to her consistent winning days. I know you echo those thoughts. And then the real sad thought, the announcement from Dominic Thiem that he will reportedly retire at the end of the year. And everyone has their favorite moments of Dominic Thiem. There were a bunch of battles with Rafa at the French Open. The one that sticks with me the most was against Rafa, but was not at the French Open. It was that 2018 U.S. Open quarter missed overhead. Sorry for the video there, I froze a little bit. Sorry for the missed overhead by Dominic Thiem. That was the match that stuck with me. I know you have a few in your head as well with Dominic.
Yeah, I mean that was a very gritty performance for him. Obviously, I certainly remember the COVID U.S. Open of 2020 when he
Right.
won lone major in a bizarre match. It wasn't his best performance. He was down 2 sets to 11 a break against Zverev, and also down a break in the fifth with Zverev serving for the match, and he finally eked it out in the fifth set tiebreak. But I was so happy for him because he'd already been in a couple of French finals, and he played also a final against Novak in Australia, which was a very memorable match, a 5 set loss to Novak, beat Novak in a French semi in 19. So I actually think of a whole cluster of matches. Those are the ones that stand out.
Was
But
that
how
was that
well
semi versus Novak the real windy day? Didn't Rafa play
yes,
Federer in the other semi? It was really windy, right? Really
yeah,
windy.
it was. But what happened was that Djokovic was so distraught by the conditions, so aggravated, that after the first set, he virtually said to the umpire, "We're done." And nobody could really blame him because it was horrendous. They came back the next day, was still very windy, but not as bad as it had been on Friday. But I think it left Thiem, who beat Novak 7-5 in the fifth, at a slight disadvantage to have to play that much tennis on Saturday to return Sunday to face Rafa. So, but I thought he was worthy of a French. Rafa stopped him twice in the finals. He could have won the Australian because he had 2 sets to 1 against Novak in that final, and Novak came back and beat him in 5 there. So, and then of course he did win the U.S. Open. The only one where he wasn't really a factor was Wimbledon. He never did that great on the grass, but the other three he shined a lot. And what stands out in my mind more than any one match, and we've mentioned a bunch, was just how great he was against the big three consistently. And Novak ended up with a 7-5 record against him. He had a winning record against Roger and a good record, decent, I think 6-10 against Rafa. So he did so well against those guys and was not afraid of them. And they respected him for the brute force of his game, plus the earnestness of the man. And they all liked him personally a lot because there was no nonsense, never any gamesmanship. So it's a shame. I'm just glad that at least he leaves with the one major. He doesn't leave without one. He was worthy, I think, of a couple more, and it just didn't quite happen for him. But a great player and good decision, by the way. Things had just not been going right, and the wrist had never really fully recovered, and he went through too many hard times. I didn't want to see him going on, lingering around 100 in the world. That's not where Dominic Thiem belongs, and he wasn't making much progress. I think it's a wise choice to leave and be very proud of the record that he had.
And whether it would be Thiem or Sasha Zverev in that 2020 U.S. Open final, I think it's a
Yeah,
shame that they didn't have the crowd there, because when you win a
yeah,
slam, that's the epic. That's the pinnacle of the sport. And I wish he would have had the crowd there to celebrate that with him in that match.
I agree, but he'll take it. He'll take it. And what was great about it was that, and frankly, not just that final, which wasn't the highest quality final, but for what the players did throughout that Open to perform at the level they did with no fans was remarkable, because it had to have been the strangest feeling to be in this 23,000 seat stadium, the Arthur Ashe Stadium, the capital of American tennis, and have just only employees, a few employees, coaches, broadcasters sitting around in the empty stands with no noise. I had to really, it was commendable how well they all played. And so I thought Thiem did a terrific job there, particularly since he was on the brink. He could so easily have lost to Zverev in straight, and he also could have lost him again in 5, but he pulled it out, and that was the lone major, and maybe that balanced out a bit for the 2 French finals and the one in Melbourne.
Well, I'll try to transition to the best that I can on certain things that we talk about today, but again, it's going to be a little bit all over the place. We did mention some of the battles between Dominic Thiem and Rafa. We'll stick with Rafa. We felt the previous tournament Rafa played, he really sunk his teeth into it and got a lot of good work in it. This week, not as much. In Rome, he wins his first round in 3 sets. That, though, helped. He has still never lost back-to-back matches on clay. Remarkable feat. But then we knew he had a challenging second-round opponent, Hubie Hurkacz. Maybe not surprising that Hubie won, but the score and what had happened was 6-1, 6-3. Not the ideal prep that Rafa wanted in this tournament.
No, it was a strange match because the first 2 games consumed 27 minutes. Marathon games, and Rafa with, Rafa, I guess, had 5 break points, and then he had to save 2 break points. And at that point, you thought this could be quite a struggle and quite a hard competitive match. But Hurkacz ran out the first set, saved 2 more break points in his last service game. And then, although the second set was 6-3, he lost 1 point on his serve, 16 out of 17 points for Hubie on serve in the second set. So it was not a close 6-3. While, as Rafa pointed out, it oddly was a closer 6-1, that the score was a little bit misleading.
7 break points, Steve. 7 break points.
Yeah, 5 in the first game and then 2 more at the end of the set. So they were in 2 different games in the first set, first and last games of the first set. And then Rafa didn't have any more, didn't come close in the second set with just the one point in his return game. So I feel like, Hubie surprised me, but he was so good from the backcourt. He was waiting for his openings. He was looping balls and then waiting for just the right one to tee off and hit his flatter drives. And he had Rafa scurrying around that court. He had Rafa sort of guessing and scrambling and not able to dictate nearly as often as he wanted. So I think Rafa was disappointed because he felt like he was playing better in practice, and he had won his opening round match, and he thought maybe he was ready for better things. And so he sounded like he was somewhat torn about playing Roland Garros, but obviously leaning toward doing it. I think it would be a mistake, serious mistake for him not to play. He's played these 3 tournaments. In the worst case scenario, if he went out and lost in the first round of Roland Garros, so my answer is, so what? You won the title 14 times, doesn't tarnish his record in the least. And he would get the biggest ovation any first round loser has ever been the recipient of in that stadium, that would go on for God knows how long. But that's the worst case scenario. Maybe ideally he can win a few rounds. Ideally, maybe he can squeeze his way into the 16s or quarters, best case scenario. But I just feel like he owes it to himself, not to the fans. He's worked hard to get back and play this year after so long away, in Brisbane all the way to the clay court circuit. Only played at the beginning of last year and didn't play after the Australian Open. So it's been he knows he's turning 38 during the tournament. And I just feel like you could see how happy he was even after losing to Hurkacz. He was walking along outside on the level above the fans through this walkway, and they saw him and applauded. And you could see the gratification on his face. And if he thought that
were unbelievable, Steve, the crowds watching.
But what I'm saying is, if he thought that was rewarding, emotionally rewarding, imagine what the reception he would get at Roland Garros, where there's a statue and he virtually owns the place, 14 titles. he doesn't want to miss out on that, I think. So I'm pretty convinced in the end he will decide to play. The question is going to be which seed does he catch early? How well does he adjust to best of five, which used to be his saving grace, used to be a big advantage for him. Right now, given all the stuff that's going on with his body and just playing, you know, 2, 4, I guess 8 matches total in these 3 tournaments, the best of five may not be a big advantage. He may want to get through more quickly, but none of that really matters that much. I think that, you know, just being there and playing what surely would be his last major tournament, or certainly last French Open, is something he doesn't want to miss out on.
Someone suggested seed him at 32. I thought that was funny when they suggested it, just so he
Well,
gets.
you know, it's a funny thing. They've never liked to mess with the seedings there. Wimbledon used to, and they stopped doing it. Some of those years, I mean, some of these times, there were times when he didn't get seeded where he should have been based on his ranking at the time, when he was having difficult years in 15 and 16. And I shake my head because we had some, you know, we had he lost to Novak in the quarters in 15. They never should have been playing in the quarters, you know. And then
they recently played in the quarters just a couple
of
years
ago.
ago.
Yeah, they played again in the quarters, and Rafa beat him. That also shouldn't have happened. And they played a semi. A semi's all right. Semi's all right. They played more than one semi, but I just think they never should have been meeting as early as the quarters. And if the French Open had been willing to, but I think they're so worried politically about me. The funny thing is, the one thing I don't think the players would ever bicker about, any of them, is if Rafa had been lifted in the seedings, or even this year, if you joke about it, but if they had given that to him based on the weight of his record over the years, it's hard to imagine that and anybody would complain. But I don't think it's going to happen. He's just going to have to live with whatever card he's dealt, and it could be a tough one.
Well said. Let's go over to Novak now. And you know, we saw what happened when he was signing autographs right after his first match, and he got there was a water bottle, a metal water bottle that fell, hit him on the head. I mean, you saw the reaction from Novak. He went down, and he was down for quite a bit. He was not himself. He said that he was not himself in the match that he lost the next day. Well, the next day he came to practice with a bike helmet on. I thought that was really, you know, he's really funny. He has a really good sense of humor.
He does. He does.
He really does. I thought that was really funny. But then the following day when he played his match, he lost 6-2, 6-3. He did not look like himself at all. He said so himself. And I think the water bottle, I think that did have an effect, you know, whether it's a minor concussion, if there is such a thing, or a regular concussion. I don't want to put too much weight into that one match. Yes, he doesn't have great preparation going into Roland Garros. He has not won a tournament, by the way, in 2020. He has not won a tournament this year in 2024. So that's not ideal. But I wouldn't put so much weight on this match, himself losing, as what could happen in Roland Garros. Get him healthy, and he would be another player. If he loses in Roland Garros, he loses, but it won't be because of the performance that he had in Rome.
No, I agree with you largely. Largely, I agree. I think what hurts him, yeah, it's not, I mean, he knows. He doesn't have to look at that as, why did I play so badly? He knew he was feeling disoriented. He said he realized he had no balance. Jimmy Arias on the commentary kept talking about how off balance he was. And he said it himself in the press conference. And obviously he was a little bewildered by it. He talked about how after he got hit by the water bottle, there, you know, some dizziness and he got a bump on the head, a little bleeding. And there were a bunch of things that happened and he obviously was convinced he could recover, and he didn't. I think when he put that helmet on and came out, that was a good sign. But he also said after losing that he had kind of cut his training short that day. And that tells you something too. Now, this guy that he lost, his left-hander, Alejandro Tabilo of Chile. I mean, he's a terrific player. And Novak started off his press conference lauding Alejandro. But Djokovic never got beyond, the best opening he had to break serve was 15-30 once. Never got to deuce, never went near a break point. And also during the rallies, it just looked like he was playing mindlessly by his standards, just sort of hitting balls with no purpose and not able to sort of get off the defense onto the offense, or able to play the kind of defense that would extract errors. So he made it pretty easy on him, but that was clearly, you know, he didn't want to blame it entirely on the water bottle incident, but I believe it largely was. and he needs to. He talked about getting some tests. He should, because you alluded to a possible concussion. That was exactly what my thought was after he had his press conference yesterday. This could be some type of mild concussion, because all the things that he described would come under the banner of a concussion, and maybe it's not too serious, but he needs to know what he's dealing with, because we got 2 weeks up, less than 2 weeks to Roland Garros as we speak. And the one thing he's going to want to do, having not played many matches, because he got the 4 matches in Monte Carlo, made the semis, and he had the kind of draw here where he could have gone very deep and maybe won this tournament. So now he wants to at least make up with some tough training sessions. Say, I'm sure some longer practices at the least, to just get himself geared up for it. But he needs to find out what the story is with, in terms of his head and his brain, and what might have happened with, and whether it actually is a concussion. And I suspect he's already started in on that today. I wouldn't think he's wasting any time. But that was a shocker, because he was so listless. You could see something was when he wasn't reacting. He would have been getting a little angry or just frustrated, and sort of revved himself, found something from within, some spark. There was none, and there was no good movement. And he did look like he wasn't setting up for his shots anything like he normally does. So I think there's time, but I also think he needs a little time to prepare. He needs at least a good week of practice sessions, and he should be able to get that as long as he gets a clean bill of health.
All right, we're going to talk about a quartet of Americans right now. Sebi Korda, who played a very tough, entertaining, if you're watching it, early round match against Kabali, wins 6-4 in the third. It was like a Davis Cup atmosphere against Sebi. And you saw how when Sebi finally won that match, he turned to the people right behind him and blew him a sarcastic kiss, because he said they were making personal statements about him, his family, his girlfriend, whatnot. He then plays Taylor Fritz, who Taylor, to me, he's better on this clay stuff than I originally thought. Again, he made the semis in Monte Carlo last year.
Right, yeah.
He lost to Taylor 6-3, 6-4. And then you got Tommy Paul, who's doing well. We're going to talk about him a little bit later in his rematch against Daniil Medvedev coming up. And then Steve, Francis Tiafoe cannot get out of this funk. He looks completely lost out there on court a little bit. May not have a plan in place when he's going out there right now. And I hope, and I know he hopes, he can get out of this bad stage of his tennis sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think I agree, but I think it's probably going to be post. Unless he is fortunate enough to have one of those inspired days at Roland Garros where he's playing one of the top players and it gets him excited, and the likelihood is the revival and the turnaround and the revitalization could take place starting Wimbledon. I don't expect it sooner, but there's so much tennis left from Wimbledon across the summer on all the hard courts, U.S. Open and then beyond, that he doesn't need to get frantic, but he does need to sort of face the music and find a way out of this. And I hope he does. The players like him, very popular guy, very gifted. And I can't imagine he's going to keep playing at this level. It's not his level. He'll find something. He'll find some confidence soon enough, but it may take a couple more months.
Before we talk about the women on the WTA side of things, I want to talk Casper Ruud real quickly. He lost early in Rome. He started the clay court season really strong. Semifinal in Estoril, final in Monte Carlo, won Barcelona, Steve. Madrid and Rome, not that great. I'm not concerned with Casper. And at the end of this segment, I'm going to tell you he's still one of my favorites, especially it's wide open this year. A lot of people are injured. These last 2 results aren't alarming for me for Casper. I'm still confident.
Well, no, because of what you said about the start, where he split the 2 tournaments with Tsitsipas and lost him in one final, beat him in the other. And so he won't forget about that too quickly. What's frustrating about this week's loss is Kecmanovic, the Serbian, beat him, and Casper won the first set 6-love. So those are tough. Sometimes it's just. Sometimes I think those guys would prefer a 6-1 or 6-2 set to 6-love. I've seen this happen sometimes. Well, in a sense, you kind of feel like you're there already, and it's just the other guy is feeling like he has absolutely nothing to lose now because he's been obliterated in the first set. Whatever the reasons, matches. There's some strange results after players have won. I remember Pete Sampras once lost to Wayne Ferreira after winning a 6-love first set, and he said afterwards, Wayne was in another zip code the first set. But then suddenly, you get in a tight second set, you lose that, and you're in a battle in the third, and you're wondering why you're still out there. So that was a tough one, but I agree. Listen, you look back at the last 2 years where he lost to Rafa in the 22 final, he lost to Novak in the final of Roland Garros last year. That's 2 in a row. A lot of us didn't think it was a good chance he'd be back in the final last year either, that he'd be able to replicate what he did in 22. Well, he did. And this time, I actually think he still has pretty good confidence despite the last 2 tournaments. Plus, physically, he'll be fresh. So I still expect him to have a very good Roland Garros.
All right, let's go over to the WTA side of things. Elena Rybakina, she withdrew because of an illness, Steve, and she also withdrew earlier in Indian Wells. Now, we don't know if the 2 illnesses are related. I'm not sure they are, but let's hope this is nothing like long-term. Maybe she played deep in the tournament last week, lost a great semifinal to Sabalenka, but let's just hope this isn't like a common thing with her, because we want that trio to continue deep into all these tournaments, and that trio being, of course, Swiatek, Sabalenka, and Rybakina.
Yeah, I think a lot of it with Rybakina is wear and tear, and playing so many matches this year and being in so many finals and winning titles that it's taken something out of her. I'm kind of cautiously optimistic that it's not going to be anything too serious, and she'll be right back in the swing of things. So I'm confident that we'll see her actually back in pretty good shape by Roland Garros, I expect.
Coco Gauff, credit to her. She is now in the quarterfinals, Steve. Despite her previous match serving 15 double faults over the course of 3 sets, today's match over Badosa, which is a good win, she won 5-7, 6-4, and looked strong in the third, 6-1. First serve percentage, 37%, had 11 double faults. Again, credit to her for getting as far as as she gets in these tournaments, despite some bad statistics on her side.
Well, she talked about it after the match and felt better about today's performance because obviously that's a very low percentage. She says that the reason, I think her explanation for the percentage being low is she's going for it. She's really going for that first serve, and she can get it up there in the 120s, and she loves the feeling of aces and service winners and quick points. But obviously realizes that, she feels like the key to reducing the doubles is actually to start getting that first serve percentage up a bit. So she needs to compromise maybe a bit more, go for a couple of big ones, but then at 15 all, slow it down a bit, get some first serves in. It's like, I'll never forget Bud Collins when we used to play, and I'd get nervous against him in double fault. And he'd remind me of what Hazel Whiteman, who was the donor of the original Whiteman Cup series between the U.S. and Great Britain, and a great American player in the early days. She said, you can't double fault if you get your first serve in. And that was what Bud used to always remind me of. And it's true. And I think that's basically what Coco is saying. I've got to get more first ones in. That takes pressure off my second serve. And what's disappointing, what must be distressing is we know that a couple of years back, this was a perennial problem at that stage. She was serving a lot of doubles. She seemed to stop it almost entirely. Not nearly as many last year. Now it's kind of creeped back into her game. So this is the time to eliminate. But despite all that, important win over Badosa, who won 3 out of 4 against Coco, and just beaten her recently. And gets her into the quarters, see where she goes from there. But at least it's something going to Roland Garros. She wanted to get a string of wins. She's done that. And, I hope that she reminds herself of what she said today and starts getting that first serve percentage back up at least into the 55 to 60% range. It can't be 37. And she's very fortunate to win against a player of Badosa's caliber with that kind of percentage. So right. I think I'm sure, and Gilbert's over there with her. I'm sure he's going to be reinforcing that with her and talking to her about it and figuring things out. But today, the forehand was pretty good. I must say, the forehand held up very well. So that was the plus side.
Her quickness, her defense, and her backhand. I mean, the backhand is so sweet. I mean, that's really the weapon. And you could see she really tries to blister that backhand whenever she's in position to do so. So let's see how the latter rounds go for Coco. Just about 2 hours ago, Sabalenka won an incredible match over Svitolina 4-6, 6-1, 7-6. Saves 3 match points. The only thing that we have to look out going forward for Sabalenka is she's having some back issues again. She's played a lot of tennis the last couple
Yeah,
of weeks. So we'll
but you
see
know
how
what?
that develops going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. But she had the back treated. The trainers, they were working on it after the second set. And then in the third, despite having to have that work done in the second set, had disappeared quickly. She went up 5-3 in the third, served for the match at 5-4, played a bad game. The next thing you know, Sabalenka's serving 5-6, 15-40. That was the first 2 match points that she got out of. And then she saved one more in the ensuing tiebreak, and she pulled that one out from match. She had been up match point first, then down match point for the third time, and finally from 6-7 match point down, won 3 points in a row to finish off a very inspired Svitolina. So that was, I just am really impressed. She used to be the last player I would count on in the tighter matches because I felt like she almost wanted it too badly, and she could get in her own way because she was so emotional, and you felt like she was going to crack under pressure. Now, I don't feel that way at all. I feel like we keep seeing this now, and that even when she loses, she goes down the right way, and I feel like she's improved immeasurably as a competitor. And this was another example of it today because Svitolina played well enough to beat her, but was not rewarded with a victory.
So close. Great match from both. Okay, we're gonna end this with talking 5 matches that are gonna be played in the next day or two. We got the first one I want to talk about is Taylor Fritz. I mentioned him a little bit earlier versus Grigor Dimitrov. I mean, both guys are playing great. Grigor has had a resurgence of his career over a long, quite a long period now. The past, I don't want to limit it, but I'd say he's a new player the last 12 months.
Yeah, I'm not. He's been terrific. He's been terrific. It hasn't been, a spectacular. He's been very good on the clay. He was better on the hard. Taylor is maybe a little more in form right now at the moment, but it's almost a coin toss. I wouldn't be surprised to see either win. I might lean ever so slightly right now toward Fritz. And he's been in good form here, and maybe I give it to him 7-5, 7-6 in the third. But I think the outcome is heavily in doubt. I'm really looking forward to that contest, and no doubt that Grigor will push him to the limits. But will he return well enough, or will Taylor rule the day with his serve and forehand combination? I'm looking forward to it.
And then I mentioned Casper Ruud earlier. It's one of my favorites for Roland Garros. Stefanos Tsitsipas is also one of my favorites for Roland Garros. He plays Alex de Minaur in a great match. Should be, again, I mean, that could be a coin flipper as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I do. Yes, but it's just that he's got, I think, a 10-1 career advantage now. He finally lost to him recently. And de Minaur talked about that today and said, well, and I'm playing him on his best surface, but he feels like he too has improved on clay. Given the history, given the recent resurgence of Tsitsipas, I like his chances, but we know what a tough out de Minaur is. So I still expect it to be pretty hard fought and most likely 3, but I would go with Steph to win it.
The one I'm really interested in is the rematch from Indian Wells, and that's Tommy Paul versus Daniil Medvedev. You remember the Indian Wells match? Tommy played lights out that first set, blitzed Medvedev, gets to a tiebreaker in that second set before Tommy turned his ankle. He then in Miami turned that same ankle again. Tommy wound up losing that match to Medvedev in Indian Wells in 3 tough sets. Tommy played that match so well, Steve. You remember Tommy serve and volleyed on that very first point against Medvedev, and he was constantly going forward because Medvedev was playing so far back in Indian Wells. Medvedev's service, this clay surface is not his favorite. I'm leaning towards Tommy taking this match, Steve.
No, so am I. So am I. I feel like not just because he came so close in Indian Wells, where he could have possibly won it in straight sets if he could have won that second set tiebreak, but because Medvedev he's had a hard time here. Clay, he won this title last year. So the last tournament that he won was here last year, oddly, for a player of his caliber who's had so many close calls since and a bunch of finals. Hasn't won a title since here. And that was surprising in itself because clay has not been his turf. So, and he hasn't, today he played last year, the winner of last year of the next gen finals. And that was this Medjedovic, who of course is another Serbian who's ranked 121 in the world right now. And Medjedovic pushed Medvedev all the way to 7-5 in the third. And Daniel was up 4-1 in the third. And next thing you know, it's 4-all, and he's down love 30 on his serve. So he squeezed that match out. Also, Medjedovic had at least one game point to get it into a tiebreak before losing his serve last game of the match. Extremely tight. And, he didn't look that good against Jack Draper, Medvedev as well. So I'm not convinced by his form right now. So I weigh that in. Tommy looks good. It'll still be very close. But I think given the circumstances and the clay, I think Tommy's going to feel like he has an even better chance than he did in Indian Wells on this court. And obviously a little pressure on Medvedev trying to defend his title. So listen, I'm not shocked with either one winning, but I'm leaning Paul in 3 sets.
I'm with you. Watch Medvedev blitz him in straight sets, and we'll both be wrong. So, 2 matches in the women's side in the quarters. Actually, I want to talk about Iga Swiatek versus Madison Keys. Here's a fun stat from Madison Keys about Madison Keys. It's actually from a person we've had on this podcast with us, Steve, from Jeff Sackman. Madison Keys has a higher career winning percentage on clay, 60.6%, than she does over hard court, 59.2%. I would have never guessed that stat. It's close.
No,
it's close,
either.
But I would have never guessed that.
Yeah, although it's 1% basically, so it's not huge. I guess I'm more surprised that the winning percentage on hard isn't closer to 70%, right, given her game. So right, that's the surprise. But it just shows you that it's illustrative of how good Madison can be on clay, how surprisingly good she can be. So on the other hand, although Iga struggled with Angie Kerber a bit in a 5-3 match, I still like her chances to beat Madison in straight sets.
And then the last match I want to talk about is Victoria Azarenka, who just beat Maria Sakkari 6-4, 6-1 a few hours ago. I thought that match would be a little bit more competitive as far as how the score went. Vika plays Danielle Collins, who, she did lose. She finally lost last week's tournament, but she is still such on a roll there. Azarenka versus Collins, what do you think?
On current form, Collins, she hasn't let up since that great hard court swing at Indian Wells in Miami back-to-back. So I really feel like, lost her in the last tournament, so close to Sabalenka. Right now, I like Collins' chances to win that match, maybe even in straight sets, because her standard has not dropped on the clay. I thought perhaps have slight letdown on the clay. It's not her favorite surface, but she's playing almost as well as she did on the hard. So I've got to go with her.
Should be a good one. We're going to do this as it gets closer to Roland Garros, but as we close, I said, previously, Tsitsipas and Ruud, Zverev, again, probably the 3 favorites going in just because there's so many wild cards. That said, you're never going to count out Novak. If Carlos gets healthy, you're never going to count him out. And then we got Rafa, that guy from Mallorca, who wherever he gets placed in the draw, if he decides to play, can open up a quarter or half of a draw, depending how that goes. We're going to do this closer, but it's going to be a wild Roland Garros, Steve.
Yeah, no, it will be. We have to just see, especially with Djokovic, what the report is and what kind of physical condition he's in, and hopefully he's shaking this off, and hopefully it's not a concussion. Then we got to hope that Carlos's arm is improved and that Sinner's hip is improved so that they can just play at all. And we know how Carlos is itching to play. That's what led him back into competition. He missed Monte Carlo and Barcelona. That's what made him play Madrid. Maybe that was rushing it because he re-aggravated that arm and hurt it again. And he was playing with that big arm brace, which looked very uncomfortable. And of course, he lost to a very in-form Rublev. But I hope the arm is okay for him. And then the hit. I guess I'd say this: Carlos is going to be hard to hold back because he's just so determined. Sinner, I think, is more laid back with his personality, so that if he was faced and told by doctors you should wait, you want to wait for the grass court season, it's too soon, I think he'd accept it with some equanimity. I think it'd be harder for Carlos, given his personality, to say, okay, I'll wait. Because he loves Roland Garros and because he knew he was a contender, strong contender, the last 2 years. And he went there 2 years ago and lost to Zverev in a quarterfinal. And then last year got to the semis. And that's when he had the severe cramping against Novak and he lost that in 4. So I think he's so disappointed that his clay court campaign, excuse me, has been disrupted. But I think it would be very hard for him to say, to accept not being in Paris.
Well said, Steve. Thanks again also to David and Katie. They always keep me in line, got me prepared for these. They don't have to worry about you, Steve. You're always bringing your A game. Thanks again for your time, and we'll talk again after Rome, and Roland Garros is coming up.
Yeah, looking forward to it, David. Enjoyed it.